On the first day of Diablo 4, I decided to stream the first 12 hours. Because I'm already familiar with the Barbarian and the Sorcerer from the previous games, I decided to play the Rogue. By far, the most common question was, Alvis, can I lick your hands? But the second question was, can you play the Rogue melee only? So with your brains and my beauty, we're going to answer that question. After completing the campaign and 90% of the dungeons, I thought, stuff it. Let's respec from the marksman bow style of gameplay to 100% melee on every single skill. Now, to my surprise, I created what I believe to be one of the strongest builds across all of the classes. And it just so happened to be the Melee Rogue. Yes, you can play a melee style of rogue, and it's unbelievable. This is me killing a dungeon boss at the same level as me while taking 0 damage in 9 seconds. Single target damage is incredibly strong, but most of the game you're killing packs of monsters, so the group damage is equally as effective. You'll notice that the build's damage takes 1 second before massive amounts of damage comes out. This is part of the Melee Rogue's build design. Let me show you just exactly what's going on here. So to play Diablo 4 effectively, you need a mobility skill or an invulnerability skill. The first ability that I chose was called Dash. So you dash forward and slash enemies. You also have 2 charges. It's very good at avoiding attacks, frozen, but also traversing between monster packs, making farming items way more efficient. The damage is insignificant on this skill, but it's mostly utility. The next ability is called Dark Shroud. Surround yourself with up to 5 protective shadows, gain damage reduction for each shadow. The shadows are consumed when you're hit. Now this ability makes your rogue very defensive, which is helpful when you're playing this up close playstyle. So you can also see that I've got 2 modifiers. 10% chance a shadow will not be consumed. If I have 2 shadows active from the 5, I get 10% crit chance. That's huge. Now this skill really ramps up when you combine it with this legendary power. So when a Dark Shroud shadow would be removed, you trigger an explosion around yourself that deals 131 shadow damage. In other words, every time you get hit, you explode for a heap of damage. The rogue has access to 3 ultimate abilities. One creates a shadow of yourself doing whatever you do for 60% of the damage. Also a rain of arrows attack, but the ultimate that I've used is called Death Trap. So after 1.2 seconds, the shadow triggers 1,208 damage over a huge area. This ability emits an amazing amount of damage. It's an ultimate, but it's really good for elite packs and bosses. I've also added 2 modifiers as well. Enemies are pulled into Death Trap when it activates, and if Death Trap kills an enemy, its cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds. So this allows me to use Death Trap way more frequently while pulling enemies in. Very helpful for the melee stuff. Also, it does not matter if it's 1 or 10 enemies killed, the cooldown will only ever drop 10 seconds. So it won't stack if you kill more enemies. 10 seconds, that's it. Now the next ability is called Shadow Imbuement. Imbue your weapons with festering shadows. Your next 2 imbuable skills deal shadow damage and it infects enemies for 6 seconds. Now, infected enemies explode on death, dealing 213 damage to all surrounding enemies. In other words, when I kill an enemy, it does a massive AoE damage, and it happens twice. This is how I'm able to clear very large packs of enemies so fast. So you can see my weapons are now purple from this skill, but what makes this skill so powerful is the explosion on death. So this effect lasts for the entire duration of the skill used. So if I was to send out a piercing attack, not just the first, but every single enemy hit by the attack counts as one. It gets affected. So if that skill kills 5 squishy monsters, then the 213 damage explosion on death now becomes 1065 damage over 5 different death triggers. This also scales with the crit attribute, so each explosion has its own chance to proc critical hit damage. Now the next ability is just an energy generator. It doesn't matter, you rarely use it anyway. But the final ability is called Twisted Blades. Impale your enemies with your blades, dealing 277 damage and making them take 8% increased damage while impaled. Now after 1.5 seconds, the blades return to you, piercing enemies for 443 damage. In other words, you plant your blades in a monster and then they return back to you, doing damage to anything in between as it comes back. A little bit like a boomerang. So I've got 2 modifiers on this skill as well. When your Twisted Blades return, your active cooldowns are reduced by 1 second per enemy it passes through. This is capped at 3 seconds. Also, Twisted Blades deal 30% increased damage when returning, a very straightforward damage boost. Now here's where it gets really wild, okay? So I've got this legendary affix. This is what it does. Twisted Blades orbit for a short time after they return to you, twice, dealing 18% Twisted Blades return damage per hit. Okay, so based on the distance the blades returned, the orbit damage is increased to 36% of the return damage. It kind of looks and plays a lot like the Diablo II Hammerden, if you're familiar with the game. Now, there's no limit to the amount of Twisted Blades you can use. In other words, using the skill 3 times will give me 3 orbiting blades. So if you've got a lot more attack speed, you've got a lot more blades spinning around you. Now remember earlier I mentioned shadow imbuement, infected enemies explode on death. Now any attack that pierces is counted as 1 charge. So the entire time the Twisted Blade skill is used and rotating around me because of the legendary effect, it's still 1 use. It sends out the 213 damage explosions on top of the Twisted Blade's own damage as well. So this is what all of these abilities look like together. So to answer the original question, can you make a melee rogue? You can, and it's brutal. Subscribe if you want to see some more Diablo 4 stuff. Yeah!